On April 22, 2026, the Season 4 finale of Invincible opened with a tsunami drowning the eastern seaboard, Thrag standing over a burning Earth, and the show holding that image for almost 2 full minutes before pulling back to reveal that none of it had happened. It was inside Mark Grayson's head. It would happen again, 4 more times across the same episode. Each version a different person dying, each one ending the same way, with Mark gasping awake into a world that was somehow still intact, while everyone around him kept moving as if the air had not just torn open in front of them. That repetition is the finale. The whole thing, what the show is doing in the silence between those hallucinations, is teaching you, with extraordinary patience, how a hero stops being one. The episode is called Don't Leave Me Hanging Here. It is the first season finale this show has ever produced without a climactic fight, and there is a reason for that. The fight had already happened. What remained was a young man at altitude, alone, making a decision he would not be allowed to take back, and a final shot of him floating with nothing underneath him but air. There are people calling this finale anticlimactic. There are people calling it slow. There are people who watched it on Prime Video at 3 in the morning Eastern Time on a Wednesday and went to bed wondering if the entire season had been building toward what felt like an absence. Those reactions are real, and they are wrong in the same way the people calling the closing 15 minutes of The Sopranos a cop-out were wrong. What you watched on April 22nd was not a finale that failed to commit. It was a finale that committed to something this show has been threatening to do since the first season, and it pulled the trigger so quietly that some of you, watching tired with the lights off, missed it. Before we go any further, a quick note. If long-form essays like this are what you came here for, subscribing genuinely helps the channel keep going. It costs nothing and takes about 3 seconds. Now, back to the work. What happened on Earth on that April Wednesday on the screens of several million people was that Mark Grayson became his father, not in the way the first season threatened, not in the operatic, blood-spattered Chicago subway way, where the lesson is that strength is corrupting and that a Viltrumite who has been on this planet long enough still sees humans as livestock. When the math gets uncomfortable, Mark became his father in the quieter, more terrifying way. He made a moral compromise with a horror in order to keep billions of people safe, told no one about it, and then floated alone in the sky asking himself what he had done. The episode does not give you the answer, the next season will. To understand why that ending is the ending, you have to understand the architecture of the episode itself. Almost everyone who watched it noted the structure as strange. A season finale that opens on the apocalypse and then reveals the apocalypse to be a fake-out. A season finale that has no third-act fight. A season finale where the most violent moment is a janitor with a console punching electronics into submission because the man who built them did not bother to label any of the buttons. The structural strangeness is the point. The episode is built like a memory of trauma, not like a story. It moves the way Mark moves through it, in concentric circles, each return to the same image a little smaller, a little tighter. A little more like an admission. The opening sequence runs roughly 4 minutes before the title card. In it, Thrag and the surviving Viltrumites materialize over Earth and begin a slow, methodical destruction. Buildings come down, civilians are killed in close-up. A tsunami rises off the Atlantic and swallows everything from Cape Cod down to Virginia Beach. The animation is exceptional, the kind of work the show has trained you to expect by Season 4. And it lasts long enough that you, watching, begin to wonder whether the writers have genuinely decided to open the finale with this. Then Mark wakes up. He is on the interstellar starship, the coalition vessel ferrying him and Nolan and the surviving Earth contingent home from the Viltrum homeworld. His father is sitting beside him. Tech Jacket is across the cabin, trying to make a joke. The Earth is intact. The whole apocalypse was a panic attack. That is the show telling you in the first 4 minutes of its finale what the next 90 are going to be. They are going to be a series of these. Mark will sit in a chair and his mother will be killed in front of him by a god who is not in the room. Mark will hold Eve and her body will be torn open by a Viltrumite who is not on the planet. Mark will look at Cecil and Cecil will be ripped in half by the air. Each one will last just long enough to be unbearable. And then it will end, and the world will be normal again, and Mark will be alone with the knowledge that none of it happened and all of it could. This is what post-traumatic stress looks like when an animated superhero show finally takes it seriously. It is not the trembling hands and the broken voice and the single tear running down a single cheek. It is repetition. It is unwanted rehearsal. It is the mind preparing for the worst case by living it again and again until the worst case feels familiar enough to survive. The clinical literature calls these intrusive images, and the people who have them describe them in language almost identical to the language Mark uses when he finally agrees. 2/3 of the way through the episode, to walk into the Global Defense Agency and ask Cecil to refer him to someone he can talk to. He says he sees things. He says he cannot stop seeing things. He says he is afraid he is going to do something terrible because he cannot tell anymore where the seeing ends and the doing begins. Cecil is not a man who is good at this. The episode handles this beautifully. He is a wartime spy master and a former soldier, and he has handled the entire planet's superhero infrastructure with the cynicism of someone who knows that every weapon he deploys is, in the end, a person. He has never been asked on screen to comfort someone. When Mark tells him about the visions, Cecil's response is not warmth. It is logistics. He arranges the referral. He puts the wheels in motion. He says, with the flatness of someone who has lost too many people to be soft about it, that this is what the agency exists for. That Mark is not the first. That Mark will not be the last. That there is, somewhere in a building, under the Pentagon, a woman with a clipboard and a recorder whose entire job is to sit with people like Mark and listen until they can hear themselves think again. That moment is one of the quietest in the season, and it is one of the most important. Cecil, who in the first season ordered the reanimate out to kill Nolan and held no remorse about it, who in the third season manipulated Mark into a series of operations whose moral weight he assumed Mark could not yet feel, sees what is happening to this kid and reaches, awkwardly, for help. The reach is administrative. It is bureaucratic. It is the most Cecil thing the man has ever done. It is also kind. There is a scene a few minutes later when Cecil sits across from Nolan, and the writers do something nobody talks about enough. Nolan apologizes. This is the third or fourth time across the season that Nolan has apologized to someone for the Chicago massacre and the slaughter of the Guardians of the Globe and the betrayal of every human being he ever loved. And the show has, with deliberation, allowed each of those apologies to land differently. Debbie did not accept. Art Rosenbaum did not accept. The boy who grew up watching his father die under Nolan's fist did not accept. When Nolan apologizes to Cecil, Cecil tells him, in language that is not warm but is also not dismissive, that it means something. That it does not undo anything. That Cecil cannot speak for the dead but can speak for himself. And what Nolan did is not forgiven, but the apology is noted. Then Cecil tells him, with the same flatness he used when arranging the therapy referral, that he wants Nolan off the planet as soon as possible. There are still 40 Viltrumites unaccounted for, Cecil says, and as long as Nolan is breathing Earth's air, the planet is a target. Get out. Nolan agrees. He has the grace in this season to know when his presence is the problem. He spends the rest of the episode preparing to leave, packing the small handful of human possessions he still allows himself. And he asks Debbie if she will go with him as far as Tel Skria, where their younger son Oliver is recovering from injuries sustained in the war. Debbie agrees. Not because she has forgiven him, the show makes that violently clear. She agrees because Oliver is her son and Oliver is hurt, and there is no version of her life where she lets her hurt child be in a hospital bed on another planet without her there. The amicable separation from Paul, the human boyfriend Debbie spent half of season 3 trying to love, happens off-screen between episodes. The show acknowledges it in 2 lines of dialogue and moves on. And this has angered some viewers, and they are not entirely wrong to be angry. The Paul subplot mattered. It was the show's way of asking whether the trauma of being Nolan Grayson's wife could ever be metabolized into a different kind of love. The answer the show gives by ending that relationship off-screen is that it cannot. Debbie cannot be other people. She can only ever be the woman who loved a monster and outlived him. The Eve subplot is where the episode does the heaviest emotional lifting, and it is where most of the viewers, those who watched it tired and sleepy in the small hours of a Wednesday morning, found the thing that broke them. Mark has been gone from Earth for months. The Viltrumite War took most of season 4 to wage, and the geography of those months has been compressed by the show into something narratively coherent but emotionally brutal. Mark left Eve. Eve found out, shortly after he left, that she was pregnant. Eve was alone. The episode does not euphemize what Eve decided to do. She had an abortion. She tells Mark this in their first conversation alone after he returns. Sitting on the small couch in her apartment in Chicago, her hair shorter than it was when he left, her body changed in ways the animation shows you with care, and she tells him that she could not be a mother to a Viltrumite hybrid, alone on a planet that might end at any moment, and with the father of the child gone, with no certainty of return. She tells him that she did not feel ready, that she felt, the whole time she carried it, as if she were holding something that did not belong to her, that she has been struggling since, with depression, with overeating, with the kind of guilt that has no clean resolution, because nothing about the decision was clean. Mark does not handle this well. He does not handle it badly. He handles it the way a 23-year-old who has spent the last several months watching his species be reduced to less than 50 individuals Who has been gutted by conquest in a corridor, who has been laid out on an alien medical slab for months, would handle it. He cries. He says he understands. He says he is not angry, and you, watching, are not sure if he is telling the truth or telling Eve what she needs to hear. He says he is sorry he was not there. Eve says it is not his fault. They both know that is only mostly true. The conversation lasts about 6 minutes. It is shot deliberately in a single setup, with the camera not moving the way the second season's most emotional scenes were shot. The decision to let it run that long, to let the silences sit, to let Sandra Oh's animation breathe and Gillian Jacobs' voice work do its work in real time is one of the boldest the show has made in this run. There is no music for most of it. There are no cuts to anything else happening anywhere else in the world. There is just a couch and 2 people and a thing that has happened that cannot unhappen. And the show trusts you, the viewer, to sit with it the same way Mark is sitting with it. Some viewers have called this exploitative. Some have called it the best work the show has ever done. Both of those things can be true. What is undeniable is that the show in this scene refuses the easy version. It does not turn Eve's decision into a referendum. It does not make Mark the moral authority over what she did. It does not, crucially, suggest that the marriage these two are clearly going to have is endangered by it. The relationship survives. The wound is part of what they will carry into season 5 and probably further. And the show has, in the writing of that survival, said something that almost no other piece of mainstream animated television has been willing to say. That 2 people can love each other through something they cannot agree on, that they can grieve different things at the same time, that they can come out the other side intact without pretending the thing did not happen. This is the architecture of the finale. The show is asking you in scene after scene to sit with things that cannot be resolved. Cecil cannot make Mark unsee his hallucinations. Nolan cannot undo the Chicago massacre. Eve cannot unhave an abortion. Donald cannot unstrand Robot and Monster Girl in whatever hellscape they have been trapped in since the season 3 finale. Alan cannot unknow what he is about to find out. Mark cannot unmake the deal he has not yet made with Thrag. That deal is the spine of the finale. It is the load-bearing structure, and the show has spent the entire episode building emotional scaffolding around it so that when the moment arrives, it lands with the weight of everything that has come before. Mark, after several panic attacks that the episode treats as significant but not unmanageable, takes Eve's suggestion and flies for a while. He flies because flying is the closest thing his species has to meditation, and because the air at altitude is empty enough that nothing can sneak up on him, and because there is, somewhere in the back of his head, the part of him that is still a teenage boy and still finds wonder in the simple fact of his own body moving through clouds. The show animates this beautifully. The blues are deeper than they have ever been in the series. The clouds have weight. You can almost feel the temperature drop as he rises. And then, against that background, in the silence of the upper atmosphere where there is nothing but Mark and the air and the very faint curvature of the planet below, Thrag appears. Lee Pace's voice has been gradually unveiled across this season. In fragments, in shadows, in moments where Thrag has been heard but not fully seen. By the time he meets Mark in the sky in the finale, the show has built him up as something not entirely physical. Something whose presence in the frame is more like weather than like a body. He arrives the way he might if he had always been there. He arrives the way the cold arrives. He arrives, and Mark, the part of him that is 23 years old, briefly tries to fight. Thrag lets him. There is a flurry of motion. There is the sound of 2 extremely large objects connecting in air, and then Thrag almost gently holds Mark in place and tells him to listen. What Thrag says is this: there are 37 Viltrumites left. He has counted them. He knows where they are, he knows how to find them, and he knows how to hide them. The coalition of planets, whose victory over the Viltrumite Empire has been celebrated across the galaxy for the better part of 2 episodes, does not know any of this. The coalition believes the Empire is functionally extinct. Thrag, who is not interested in extinction, has a different plan. He intends to live on Earth. He intends to bring the surviving 36 other Viltrumites to live on Earth. He intends to live among the human population, indistinguishable from it, blending in for as many decades or centuries as it takes. And he intends to use humans, with their compatible genetics, to repopulate his species. Slowly, quietly, over time. He is offering Mark a choice. Mark can accept this arrangement, in which case, no one will ever know the Viltrumites are still here, and Earth will be safe, and the species will eventually return. And the cost will be borne entirely by humans who will never know what is being asked of their bodies. Or Mark can refuse, in which case Thrag will, with the resources still at his command, kill everyone on this planet, not as revenge, as bookkeeping. The Viltrumites will not allow themselves to be the only survivors of a species, while another inhabits the only world they could realistically take. The math, Thrag explains, is simple. Either Mark agrees, or Earth becomes Viltrum. Mark argues. The show lets him argue. He says he will never accept it. He says he will tell the Coalition. He says he will fight. Thrag waits, the way someone with all the time in the universe waits, and as Mark argues, the hallucinations begin again. Debbie torn in half, Eve's body collapsing inward, Cecil split from collarbone to hip. The flashes are quick, almost subliminal, but the animation lingers on them just long enough for you to register what is happening inside Mark's head. And then, against that wave, a different image. Eve, smiling, the way she smiled at him before he left, the way she smiles when she is reassuring him, the way she smiled the day they decided, after years of false starts, to be together for real. The image stops the panic. The image, more than anything, Thrag has said, is what makes Mark agree. He agrees. The episode does not make it dramatic. He does not nod. He does not say the words Thrag wants him to say. He just stops arguing, and Thrag, with the air of someone who has finished a long negotiation, says, with something almost like surprise in his voice, that the universe is strange, that willing or not, he had not expected Mark to be the savior of his species. Mark, almost to himself, says, "What have I done?" And Thrag, hearing it, turns back and tells him calmly that he has just saved the lives of every person on this planet. That is the moment the entire finale has been building toward. And that is the moment that is going to define the next several seasons of this show. Because what Thrag is not wrong about, exactly, is the math. What Thrag has done with this choice is hand Mark his father's logic. The exact logic Nolan used in Chicago. The exact logic Nolan tried to explain to Mark on a subway platform in Season 1, blood on both their faces. The word think repeated 5 times in 50 seconds. The logic of the long game, the logic of the choice that has to be made by someone with the strength to make it, and the willingness to be hated by the people the choice protects. The logic that says some truths cannot be carried by the people who would be destroyed by them, and the strong must lie to the weak for the weak's own sake. That is the logic Mark spent 3 seasons rejecting. And in the sky over the United States on April 22nd, 2026, hovering alone, exhausted, hallucinating his loved ones into corpses and back, he accepted it. This is the bookend the episode is built on. Season 4 opened in Episode 1, with Mark making a different cold choice. The Sequids, the parasitic hive mind aliens introduced in Season 2, had mass-infested a Mars settlement and were preparing to spread. The leader, the prime host, was a human, an innocent human, possessed against his will, who could not be saved without first being killed. The show, in Episode 1, asked Mark to be the one who killed him. Mark did. Off camera, the episode ended with him standing over the body, his face animated in a way that suggested he had crossed a line he did not fully understand yet. Episode 8 ends with him crossing the next line, the bigger line, the one his father crossed. And the show has structured the entire season so that the finales deal with Thraglands as the second beat in a rhyme. First, the Sequid, then the Viltrumites. The Mark who exists at the end of this finale is not the Mark who started the season. The Mark who exists at the end of this finale is the Mark who, like his father, has decided that the morally clean answer is not always the answer that keeps people alive, and who has decided that he is the one who gets to make the call. That is the ending. Everything else in the episode, the Eve conversation, the Cecil Nolan reckoning, the Donald Sinclair portal disaster, the Alan subplot, the Damien Darkblood material the season seeded but did not fully resolve. All of it exists as architecture around that central beat. But the architecture matters. Each of these threads is doing work. Each of them is setting up something that will pay off in Season 5 and, almost certainly, beyond. So you should know what they were, and what they meant, and what to watch for when the show returns. Before getting into the smaller subplots that the finale resolves, it is worth walking back through the season that brought you here, because the 8 episodes of Season 4 are, in retrospect, one of the most carefully structured arcs the show has ever produced, and the finale's quiet refusal to deliver a fight is legible only against the violence the other 7 episodes did deliver. Season 4 opened on March 18, 2026, with a 3-episode premiere titled Making the World a Better Place, I'll Give You the Grand Tour, and I Gotta Get Some Air. The triple drop was Prime Video's way of acknowledging that the season had a great deal of ground to cover in 8 episodes. And the first 3 episodes were structurally one extended overture. The premiere reintroduced the world after the global catastrophe of Season 3. Cities were still rebuilding, refugee populations from the Conquest invasion were still being resettled. Cecil's Global Defense Agency had expanded its remit in ways that would have been illegal a year earlier, but that the federal government, in the wake of the previous season's collapse, had quietly authorized. Mark himself opened the season changed. Stephen Yeun's voice work in the first scene of the premiere, where Mark sits at a kitchen table with Debbie and says almost nothing for 2 minutes, "Told you?" before any dialogue confirmed it, that the boy who fought Conquest in the season 3 finale had not come home the same. The Sequid storyline, which the first 3 episodes resolved, is the structural rhyme the finale depends on. The Sequids, the parasitic crystalline hive mind aliens introduced in season 2 as the secondary antagonist of the Muller twins plotline, had, in the time gap between seasons 3 and 4, mass infested a small human research outpost on Mars. The infestation had spread. By the time the premiere opens, almost 200 human researchers and their families are functionally dead, their bodies inhabited by Sequid consciousness, their personalities suppressed but not erased. The Global Defense Agency, in coordination with the Coalition of Planets, has been studying the infestation, and they have determined that there is a single prime host, a teenage boy, 16 years old, American, the grandson of one of the founding scientists of the Mars settlement. He is the one being through which the Sequid hive mind connects to the others. Kill him, and the hive disperses. Save him, and Earth will eventually be invaded. The show in the 3rd episode asks Mark to make the decision. He does not make it quickly. There are roughly 12 minutes of episode 3 given over to him standing in a containment chamber. The boy in front of him, the boy lucid in flashes, the boy occasionally speaking with his own voice and asking, in those moments, what is happening? Mark talks to him. The show does not let you off the hook. The boy is a person. The boy did not choose this. The boy will die if Mark does what Cecil is asking him to do, and the boy will also die if Mark refuses. Only the timeline will be longer and the cost will be higher. Mark, at the end of the 12 minutes, kills him, off camera. The episode does not show you the act. The episode shows you Mark walking out of the containment chamber, his face animated in a way that suggests he has crossed a threshold he did not know was there. And the episode ends with him standing in a corridor under fluorescent light, his hands at his sides, looking down at them as if he had never seen them before. That is the bookend. The finale's deal with Thrag is the second beat. The whole season is structured around the rhyme. Mark, in episode 1, killed an innocent to save many. Mark, in episode 8, agreed to let a horror live in order to save many. Both choices are versions of the same logic, the logic of utilitarian cost. Both choices are the logic Mark spent 3 seasons rejecting in his father. The show, with the book ending, is telling you that the season is not about the Viltrumite War. The Viltrumite War is the occasion. The season is about Mark, slowly, against his will, learning to make his father's choices. Episode 2, I'll Give You the Grand Tour, introduced Dinosaurus, the season's other major Earthbound antagonist. Dinosaurus in the comics is one of Kirkman's most morally complicated villains, a humanoid dinosaur with massive intellect and a sincere belief that the only way to save Earth's long-term future is to deliberately destabilize its present, on the theory that the human species cannot solve climate change voluntarily and must be forced into the corner from which solutions emerge. The show, in episode 2, gave Dinosaurus an extended monologue, voiced by Matthew Rhys in the season's biggest mystery casting reveal, in which he explains his philosophy at length with the kind of intellectual seriousness the show usually reserves for Cecil. Matthew Rhys's performance is one of the season's high points, and it is the reason the casting was kept secret until the episode aired. Dinosaurus is not a season-long villain. He is killed at the end of episode 2, by Mark, in a fight that lasts roughly 4 minutes but feels longer because the show keeps cutting back to the dialogue from earlier in the episode. The philosophical arguments the case Dinosaurus made for why his methods were necessary. The case Mark could not fully answer except with force. Mark wins. The show does not let him feel good about it. Episode 2 ends with him sitting on a rooftop, alone. His hands clean, his face animated in a way that suggests he is starting to understand that winning fights is the easy part of being who he is. Episode 3, I Gotta Get Some Air, contained both the Sequid resolution and the first major appearance of Damien Darkblood in his expanded role. The Hell subplot, which has been the season's most polarizing storyline, begins here. Damien Darkblood, voiced by Clancy Brown with the same gravelly weight he brought to the first season, summons Mark to Hell mid-episode. The summons is involuntary. Mark is in the middle of debriefing with Cecil about the Sequid situation, and then he is, with no transition, standing on a rocky plain under a black sky, with Darkblood in front of him explaining that Hell is real and that Mark has been summoned because Mark, as one of the strongest beings in the cosmos, is one of the only people who can be told what is at stake. Darkblood explains in roughly 6 minutes of exposition that the show somehow makes work, that demons have spent millennia protecting the cosmos from creatures called the Vile. The Vile are older than the demons, older than humanity, older than most of the major civilizations of the galaxy. They are imprisoned in a region beneath Hell that the demons have spent eons maintaining. The Vile are stirring. The leader of the Vile, a being named Volcanica, voiced by Indira Varma in a performance that has been singled out as the season's most chilling, has been awake for several months and is in the process of organizing the others. Why are the Vile stirring now? Damien Darkblood does not know, he suspects but cannot prove, that the Viltrumite War has disturbed cosmic balances in ways the demons did not anticipate. He asks Mark to be aware. He returns Mark to Earth. The whole encounter takes less than 7 minutes of screen time. It is the longest piece of pure exposition the show has delivered in its run, and it has been the most criticized element of the season. Some viewers feel it is a structural mistake, an attempt to introduce a Phase 2 cosmology that the show does not have time to handle responsibly. Others feel it is exactly the kind of ambitious world expansion the show has earned. The truth, as is usually the case with this show, is probably both. The Hell material, as introduced in Episode 3, is not given enough room to fully develop. The Hell material, as planted for future seasons, is the kind of seed that can pay off enormously if the writers commit to it. The finale's mid-credits scene, with Darkblood watching something stir in the distance, is the show telling you, with deliberate restraint, that this threat is being held in reserve. Episode 4, titled Herm, was the season's first standalone, a single-location bottle episode set inside Cecil's office during a Coalition diplomatic crisis. Episode 4 was the episode that introduced Universa, the cosmic tier antagonist whose role in the season has been described by some viewers as Universa in the comics is a planet-sized being with the ability to manipulate fundamental physical constants. The show, in Episode 4, has her appear as a holographic projection in Cecil's office, demanding that Earth surrender certain assets to the Coalition, or face consequences. The negotiation that follows is 2/3 of the episode, with Cecil at his most lawyerly and Universa at her most coldly impatient. And the resolution, which involves a small concession from Earth in exchange for time, sets up the broader Coalition dynamics that will pay off in Alan's storyline at the end of the season. Episode 4 was the slowest of the season's first half. It was also one of the most quietly effective, and it gave Walton Goggins a chance to deliver some of his best scenes as Cecil, which is saying something, because Cecil this season is Goggins' most consistent work in the role. Episode 5, Give Us a Moment, was the action centerpiece of the first half, and it contained the long-anticipated rematch between Mark and Conquest. Conquest, who fought Mark in the Season 3 finale and nearly killed him, returned in Episode 5 not as the primary antagonist, but as Thrag's instrument. The fight in Episode 5 is brief by Invincible standards, less than 10 minutes, but it is structured to do specific work. Mark in this fight does not win. He survives by being willing to take more damage than Conquest expects. He survives by refusing to back down. He survives by, at one point, biting Conquest's ear off, which has become one of the most discussed beats of the season among fans of the show. The fight ends with Conquest retreating, not because Mark has beaten him, but because the larger Viltrumite strategy requires Conquest elsewhere. The episode ends with Mark on a rooftop in Damascus, bleeding from a dozen wounds, calling Eve to tell her he is alive. That call is the show's most romantic scene in 3 seasons. It is also the last conversation Mark and Eve will have for several episodes, because what happens next pulls Mark away from Earth and into the Viltrumite homeworld for the back half of the season. Episode 6, the title of which the show has been careful to keep relatively obscure in promotional material, was the political setup episode. Thetis, voiced by Peter Cullen, spent most of Episode 6 negotiating with the Coalition's leadership about the timing and scale of the Viltrumite assault. The episode contains very little action. It contains an enormous amount of political world building, with the Coalition's internal factions on full display, with Alan positioning himself as the species the other delegations can trust, with Thetis laying the groundwork for what will become, in retrospect, his final act as Coalition leader. Peter Cullen's voice work in Episode 6 is restrained and weary, the voice of a man who has been holding a galaxy together for centuries and who knows he is near the end of his run. Some of the show's older viewers, who grew up with Cullen's voice as the voice of Optimus Prime, have said in interviews that hearing him deliver these scenes carries a weight beyond what is on the page, that the cumulative authority of his voice across decades of media gives Thetis a gravity the show might not otherwise have been able to produce. Episode 7, Don't Do Anything Rash, was the climactic battle of the season, and the episode where the bulk of the season's most violent material lives. The Coalition forces, led by Alan, with Mark and Nolan in the assault force, made landfall on the Viltrumite homeworld. The battle that followed lasted most of the episode. It was the most ambitious action sequence the show has ever produced, with the animation team given an entire production budget for what amounts to a single 40-minute battle, and the result was extraordinary. Buildings the size of cities collapsed. Viltrumite warriors, hundreds of years old, fought with the casual brutality of beings for whom death has been a constant possibility for their entire lives. Mark, in the middle of this, encountered Conquest one more time, and the rematch with Conquest was where the season's most discussed moment occurred. The Donald and Sinclair material is, in some ways, the show's most overlooked subplot. Donald Ferguson has been, since the first season, the show's quiet ghost, the black agent in the suit who survived an explosion in Season 1 and was reconstructed as a cyborg without his knowledge or consent, who spent 2 seasons gradually discovering what had been done to him, who became, by Season 3, one of the show's quietest moral compasses. Donald is a man who has been used by his agency and who has, in spite of that, chosen to keep serving it because the agency is what stands between Earth and the things in the sky that want to eat it. In the finale, Donald is given a job that is technically simple and emotionally impossible. He is to shut down a portal. The portal has been opened by D.A. Sinclair, the season's reanimation scientist, who has been collaborating with Cecil for reasons the show has handled with deliberate moral murk in an attempt to retrieve Robot and Monster Girl from the dimension into which they vanished at the end of Season 3. The retrieval fails. Catastrophically, something comes through the portal that should not have. A tentacled thing, an extra-dimensional horror the show animates with the same loving disgust that earlier seasons gave to the Mahler brothers' experiments and the Flaxen armies, and it kills several Global Defense Agency operatives in seconds before Sinclair, in his usual cowardly fashion, runs. Donald is left to shut down the portal. He does not know how. Sinclair never bothered to label the controls, the way no one in the history of secret government laboratories has ever bothered to label the controls. And there is something deeply satisfying about the show acknowledging that this is, in fact, how human institutions actually work. Donald, faced with the choice between letting more things come through or doing something terminal, punches the console. The portal closes. The control room is destroyed. Robot and Monster Girl are not retrieved. They are still out there somewhere. The show is telling you with this beat that the failure to bring them back will be a Season 5 problem. It is also telling you that Donald, despite everything, despite the cyborg parts in a surveillance state and the questionable orders, is the kind of man who closes doors with his fists when the people who built them have run away. This is the kind of writing the show has always done at its best. Small character beats that carry enormous structural weight. The Donald scene is 2 minutes long. It will pay off for years. The Damien Darkblood material is more confusing, and the discourse around it has been loud. Damien Darkblood, voiced by Clancy Brown, the demon detective from the first season who appeared briefly and disappeared without resolution, returned this season in a much expanded role. The show has used him to introduce an entirely original storyline that does not exist in the comics, in which hell is a real place with a real political structure, in which demons have spent millennia fighting a war against creatures called the Vile, in which the leader of the Vile is a being named Volcanica, voiced by Indira Varma, and in which Mark, in one of the season's middle episodes, was summoned to Hell to participate briefly in a battle whose stakes he did not fully understand. The Vile, the show suggested, are the thing the demons have been holding back. Without the demons, the Vile would consume not only Earth, but the cosmos. Darkblood's return to Earth at the end of the season is connected, somehow, to a reawakening among the Vile that has been triggered by the chaos of the Viltrumite War. The show has not yet told you what that connection is. The mid-credits scene of the finale features Darkblood briefly watching something in the distance, his expression difficult to read because his face is mostly fangs. The implication is that whatever woke up the Vile is going to be a problem in the seasons to come. This subplot has been polarizing because it represents a significant departure from the source material. The Invincible comics, written by Robert Kirkman with art by Cory Walker and Ryan Ottley, across 144 issues from January 22nd, 2003 to February 14th, 2018. Never had a hell. Never had demons in the sense the show is introducing them. Damien Darkblood in the comics was a one-issue red herring whose entire purpose was to introduce, briefly, the possibility that Nolan was a murderer before the comic confirmed that he was. The show, taking that throwaway character and building him into a multi-season antagonist, has done something the show has done before, in smaller doses. It has expanded. It has invented. It has decided that 2 hours of television cannot survive on the same beats that a monthly comic could carry. And it has added rooms to the house. There are viewers who are upset about this. There are viewers who feel that any departure from Kirkman's text is a betrayal. Those viewers are not wrong to feel that way, but they should know that Kirkman himself as a producer on the show, has been involved in every one of these departures, and that the show is, in many cases, expanding ideas that Kirkman did not have room for in the comics, but always wanted to explore. The Hell material specifically has been described in interviews as a long-running fascination of Kirkman's that he never got to fully develop in the original run. The show is giving him room. Whether that room is being well used is a separate question. Some of the Hell material has worked. Some of it has felt like detour. The finale leaves this thread deliberately unresolved, which is either a problem or a setup depending on how the next season handles it. It is worth understanding how the Viltrumite War unfolded in the comics, because the show's adaptation of it across Season 4 made some significant changes that will continue to ripple through the rest of the series. The comics' Viltrumite War arc began in issue 33, published in May 2006, and reached its first major climax in issue 50 in 2008. The arc was, in the comics, considerably more extended than the season managed to convey. Across roughly 40 issues, the Coalition slowly assembled. Mark trained, Alan was rebuilt after his near-fatal beating by Conquest, and Thetis revealed himself to a small inner circle. The war itself, when it finally came, took place over the course of several issues and ended with a peace negotiation that depended on a piece of misinformation the Coalition had planted. The Coalition led the Viltrumites to believe that the Scourge virus, the bioweapon that had nearly wiped out their species centuries earlier, had been re-weaponized and was being held in reserve. The Viltrumites, faced with the prospect of total extinction, agreed to a truce. The truce, in the comics, required them to settle on Earth, hidden among the human population, slowly repopulating their species. That last detail is the key one. The deal Mark makes with Thrag in the Season 4 finale is, in its broad outlines, the same deal the comics' Viltrumites accepted at the end of their war. But the show has changed who makes the deal, and the change is enormous. In the comics, the Coalition negotiated the deal. Thetis negotiated the deal. Alan and Mark were aware of the deal. The terms of the Viltrumite settlement on Earth were known to the strategic leadership of the Alliance. The deception was that the Scourge virus could not actually be re-weaponized, but the rest of the deal was, within the leadership, transparent. In the show, Mark makes the deal alone, the Coalition does not know, Alan does not know, Cecil does not know, Nolan does not know. The deal is between Mark and Thrag, and it is hidden from everyone else. That change from a known truce to a secret one is what transforms the comic's plot point into the show's character study. The comic ended the Viltrumite War with a political compromise that the leadership of both sides understood and accepted. The show is ending the Viltrumite War with a personal compromise that Mark alone has agreed to bear. The comic gave you a piece, the show is giving you a secret. The difference is everything. The Alan Thetis Scourge virus material in the mid-credits scene is the show acknowledging the original comic plot. Thetis, in his video Will to Alan, reveals that the Scourge virus does exist in a perfected form, that he had it, that it works on Viltrumites and humans alike. The comic readers watching that scene understood the reference immediately. In the comic, the Coalition only pretended to have the virus. In the show, they actually have it. The bluff has been made real, and the man who has it is Alan, who is now in a position to use it, and the man it would be used against is the species Mark has just secretly agreed to protect. The information asymmetry, which the comic resolved through transparent diplomacy, has been turned by the show into the engine of the next several seasons. Other significant comic divergences from the season include the role of Battle Beast. In the comics, Battle Beast spent a long stretch of the Viltrumite War arc on his own quest, seeking the strongest opponent in the galaxy, and his eventual encounter with that opponent was one of the comic's most memorable subplots. The show has compressed this. Battle Beast in Season 4 is part of the Coalition forces from the start, and his personal quest is referenced but not explored. Whether the show plans to give Battle Beast more standalone material in future seasons is unclear. Michael Dorn's voice work suggests the character has more story to tell, but the structural decisions of Season 4 did not give him room. The Tech Jacket and her father subplot is another significant addition to the comic material. Tech Jacket, in his original comic incarnation, was the protagonist of his own Image Comics title written by Robert Kirkman, with Tech Jacket being a young man named Zach Thompson who bonded with an alien symbiotic suit. The show has gender-swapped the character and dramatically expanded the family material. Tech Jacket's father, who appears briefly in the season finale as an older man surrounded by snacks aboard her ship, is a character with no real direct comic equivalent. The show has built a new piece of mythology around Tech Jacket that the comic readers will not recognize, and Zoe Deutsch's performance has been built around that new mythology, with the kind of care that suggests Tech Jacket is being prepared for a much larger role in subsequent seasons. The Conquest character has also been adapted in ways that differ from the comic. In the comic, Conquest was introduced in issue 61 in August 2009, in an arc that ran across issues 61 to 64. The comic's Conquest fight with Mark was extremely brutal and ended with Mark suffering injuries that took months to recover from. The comic's Conquest also did not return after his first fight. He was simply gone, killed, finished. The show, by bringing Conquest back across multiple seasons, and by giving Jeffrey Dean Morgan multiple major appearances, has done significantly more with the character than the comic ever did. The decision to extend Conquest's role across seasons 3 and 4 was, in retrospect, made specifically to set up the metacasting payoff in episode 7. The comic did not have a Walking Dead reunion to deliver, the show did. The Danian Darkblood material is, as noted, almost entirely new. In the comic, Danian Darkblood appeared briefly in the early issues as a demon detective investigating the deaths of the Guardians of the Globe. He was, in the comic, a red herring. He was deported back to Hell by the government because Hell did not have an extradition treaty, and he was never seen again. The show, by bringing Darkblood back in an expanded role and by inventing the entire vile cosmology around him, has done something the comic never did. Whether this is good or bad will depend on how Season 5 lands the material. The Mars Sequid storyline is also expanded from the comic. In the comic, the Sequids were a Mars-bound threat that was resolved relatively quickly, with Mark's involvement minimal. The show has expanded the Sequid storyline into the bookend the season needed, with Mark personally responsible for killing the Prime Host, and with the resulting moral weight building the foundation for his Thrag deal at the end of the season. The expansion is one of the show's clearer wins. The comic's brief Sequid material has been transformed into a structural beat that does meaningful character work. The Eve abortion storyline is a comic adaptation, but one the show has handled with significantly more care than the comic did. In the comic, the equivalent material happened in issue 118, with Mark and Eve having a similar conversation about an abortion that occurred while Mark was off-planet during the Viltrumite War. The comic's handling of the scene was tighter and shorter, with the emotional beats compressed into a single page. The show's expansion of the conversation across 6 minutes of screen time, with the still camera and the long silences, is the kind of adaptation choice that demonstrates the show's confidence in itself. The comic readers watching that scene recognized the material. The non-comic readers watching that scene experienced one of the most powerful moments in the show's run. Both audiences were served the Danian Darkblood and Hell material, the Tech Jacket family material, the Conquest metacasting payoff, and the secret deal restructuring of the Viltrumite War resolution are the 4 major changes the show has made from the comic source in Season 4. Each of those changes is doing something the comic could not have done with its monthly publication schedule and its different medium. The show is, in a real sense, becoming its own thing. The Kirkman who wrote the comic between 2003 and 2018 was working in one medium, with one set of constraints. The Kirkman who is producing the show, alongside the writing room he has assembled, is working in another, with different constraints and different possibilities. The show is not the comic. The show is increasingly a parallel work, with the comic as its source, but with its own structural decisions and its own dramatic priorities. By the time the show reaches its final season, the differences will likely be even more pronounced. The Alan subplot is where the finale plants its second most important bomb. Alan the alien, the cheerful Unopan warrior voiced by Seth Rogen since the first season, has been promoted across this season into the role of coalition leader. Thetis, the rebel Viltrumite who founded the coalition and held its political coalition together for centuries, was killed earlier in the season in a beat that has been one of the most emotionally devastating of the entire show's run. Peter Cullen, the voice actor best known to anyone who watched Saturday morning cartoons in the 1980s as Optimus Prime in the Transformers, voiced Thetis for his final appearances, and his performance in the death scene has been singled out by critics as one of the season's high watermarks. With Thetis gone, Alan has inherited a job he is not by training prepared for. He is not a politician, he is a soldier. He is also, the show has gently suggested across this season, not entirely up to the moral complexities of the role. In the finale's mid-credit sequence, Alan sits in his new office on the Coalition's Central Command Station, surrounded by paperwork, looking like a man who has discovered that being in charge of a galaxy mostly involves signatures. He receives a message. The message is encrypted. The encryption is specifically keyed to him in a way only Thetis could have arranged, and when he opens it, Thetis' face appears. A video will. A message Thetis recorded before his death, intended only for Alan, intended only to be seen if Thetis was no longer alive to deliver its contents in person. What Thetis tells Alan in that recording is this: The Scourge virus, the bioweapon that nearly exterminated the Viltrumite species centuries ago, and that the Coalition has been hunting for ways to weaponize since the war began, exists in a perfected form. Thetis had it. Thetis refined it. Thetis made sure it would work not only on Viltrumites, but on humans as well. The version is hidden. Thetis tells Alan where, and Thetis tells him, with the gravity of a man speaking from beyond the grave, that Nolan must never know it exists. Nolan, with his Viltrumite biology and his Earthborn family, would be the perfect vector to spread it. Whether Nolan would use it is not the question. The question is whether Nolan would be tempted to. And Thetis, who knew Nolan better than anyone in the Coalition, decided as his last act that the temptation should never reach him. The recording ends. Alan is left alone. The camera holds on his face for a long beat. The implication is enormous. Alan now possesses the only weapon that could end the Viltrumite threat for good. He also does not know that Mark has just made a deal with Thrag that depends entirely on the Viltrumites being allowed to live. If Alan ever discovers what Mark has done, the two of them will be in direct conflict over the fate of an entire species. And the bonds between Alan and Mark, which have been the show's quietest love story for 4 seasons, will fracture. That is the chessboard the finale is leaving you with. Mark has lied to save the planet. Alan has the ability to destroy the species Mark has just protected. Cecil has therapy referrals for a young man whose hallucinations are about to be replaced by an actual conspiracy he must conceal from everyone. Nolan is leaving Earth possibly forever. Eve is sitting in a Chicago apartment processing the kind of grief that does not move on a schedule. Debbie is heading to Tailskria to nurse Oliver back from injuries the show has only partly shown you. Donald is in a destroyed control room with no answers about Robot and Monster Girl. And somewhere in hell, a demon detective is watching whatever is waking up among the vile and trying to decide whether to tell anyone. To appreciate what the Alan subplot is setting up, you have to understand the long arc of the friendship between Alan and Mark, because that friendship is, in some ways, the most consistent emotional throughline the show has had outside of the family. Alan first appeared in Season 1, in Episode 4, when he arrived on Earth looking for the strongest fighter on the planet to evaluate as a potential Coalition recruit. He was, at that point, a thug, a genetically engineered Unopen warrior, designed by his species to be the strongest among them, sent on missions of varying strategic value. His first interaction with Mark was a fight. He nearly beat Mark to death. He left having decided that Earth was not yet ready for Coalition membership. The friendship began in earnest in Season 2. After Alan survived a near-fatal beating by a Viltrumite scouting party, he returned to Earth broken and looking for help. Mark, against the explicit wishes of the Global Defense Agency, brought Alan into his parents' house and helped him recover. The recovery scenes, animated with the warmth the show usually reserves for the Grayson family interior, established something the show has been protecting ever since. Alan, despite being a 7-foot alien warrior, is also a kid. He is, in his species terms, young. He has the same insecurities and the same enthusiasms as Mark. He is, in a real sense, Mark's first friend who actually understands what it is like to be Mark. The other heroes Mark works with on Earth are colleagues. The members of the Guardians of the Globe are colleagues. Eve is Eve, which is its own thing. Alan is the only person in Mark's life who is simultaneously a peer in power and a peer in age. The friendship deepened across Season 2 and Season 3. Alan learned about the Coalition's existence. Alan learned that he had been designed as a weapon by his species. Alan learned that his entire life had been engineered for purposes he had not been consulted about. Through all of that, the show used Mark as the friend who helped Alan process what he was learning. The phone calls between them, broadcast across light years through Coalition technology, became one of the show's most reliable sources of warmth. Alan would call Mark. Mark would answer. They would talk for 30 seconds about something that had happened in the galaxy. They would talk for 10 minutes about something Mark had been struggling with on Earth. The show kept the friendship light, not because it was unimportant, but because the show understood that the friendship was the kind of relationship that did not need heavy scenes to be felt. In Season 3, the friendship was tested when Alan learned that the Coalition had been keeping certain operations secret from him. Thetis, who Alan had come to revere, had been making decisions without consulting Alan, and the revelations strained the political loyalty Alan had felt to his mentor. The strain was resolved by Season 3's end, with Thetis and Alan reaching a kind of understanding. But the seed was planted. Alan had learned that the Coalition, like every other institution in his life, was capable of withholding information from him for what it considered his own good. Now, in the Season 4 finale, Alan has inherited Thetis' role. He is the Coalition leader. He is also, as of the mid-credits scene, the only person in the galaxy who knows that the perfected Scourge virus exists. Thetis has handed him a secret, the same kind of secret Thetis once kept from him, and Alan, in the moment of receiving the recording, is facing the choice of whether to be the kind of leader who keeps secrets for the good of his constituents, or the kind of leader who tells the people who depend on him what is in his hands. The show, by not showing you Alan's decision in the mid-credits scene, is preserving the suspense. But the suspense is, in some sense, false suspense, because the audience knows what Alan is going to do. Alan is going to do what Thetis did. Alan is going to keep the secret, because Alan is going to convince himself that telling Mark would be a burden Mark does not need, that telling the coalition would create political instability, that holding the secret alone is the price of leadership. And then Alan is going to find out that Mark has made his own secret deal with Thrag, and the two secrets are going to be in direct conflict, and the friendship between Alan and Mark, which has been the show's most consistent piece of warmth for 4 seasons, is going to be the thing the show breaks. That is the Season 5 engine, the actual one, the one underneath the wedding and the family drama, and the hell material. The break in the Alan-Mark friendship is what the show has been building toward, and the show has been building toward it for so long that the eventual rupture is going to feel like the kind of thing the show was always going to do. Alan will discover the deal. Alan will be horrified. Alan, with the perfected Scourge virus in his hands, will be in a position to undo Mark's deal by force, to kill all 37 hidden Viltrumites at once, regardless of where they are or who they have become attached to among the human population. The cost would be enormous. The collateral damage would be measured in human lives, because the Viltrumites are hidden among humans, and the virus in its perfected form kills both. But Alan would have the power to do it, and the show is asking, with the mid-credit scene, whether he would. That question is the show, the whole show. The question of what a being with the power to enforce moral simplicity onto a morally complicated world should do with that power. The first 3 seasons asked that question of Nolan. The first 3 seasons asked it of Mark. The 4th season has begun asking it of Alan, and the asking has just begun. Seth Rogen's voice work as Alan has been one of the most quietly effective performances of his career. Rogen, known primarily for comedy, has done the work of making Alan warm without making him a joke. He has done it for 4 seasons, in a register that the show keeps light enough to be welcoming and heavy enough to carry weight when the weight is needed. The mid-credits scene of the finale, in which Alan receives the Thetis recording, is animated to show Rogen's voice doing work it has rarely been asked to do. Alan, alone in his office, listening to the message from his dead mentor, slowly registering what he is being told. The animation team holds on his face. Rogen says nothing for almost a full minute. The silence is heavier than any dialogue could have been. It is the sound of a friendship that has not yet broken, but that has, in this moment, taken the first crack. The relationship between Mark and Alan has been, across 4 seasons, the show's clearest argument for what friendship can be. The relationship between Mark and his father has been the show's clearest argument for what inheritance is. The relationship between Mark and Eve has been the show's clearest argument for what love is. The 4th finale, by aligning Mark and Alan on opposite sides of a secret neither of them yet knows the other holds, is setting up a structural collision that will test all 3 of those arguments simultaneously. When Alan finds out, the friendship will be damaged. The damage will spread to how Mark thinks about his father, because the parallels will be impossible to ignore. The damage will spread to how Mark talks to Eve, because the secret he is keeping from her will be the same secret Alan has just discovered. The collision is the show's central event, still to come, and the Season 4 finale was the moment that loaded the gun. Season 5 was officially announced in July 2025 before Season 4 had even premiered. The voice acting for Season 4 was completed before Season 3 aired. The show is structurally locked in for what appears to be at least 2 more seasons, with strong rumors of a 6th and final run. Lee Pace will return as Thrag. Stephen Yeun, Sandra Oh, J.K. Simmons, Gillian Jacobs, Walton Goggins, Seth Rogen, Aaron Paul, Zachary Quinto, and the rest of the principal cast have all signed on. Robert Kirkman has said in interviews that he intends to end the show roughly where he ended the comic, in a 500-year flash forward in which Mark, now ageless, sits on a porch with Eve, watching the world he built reflect light back at him. To get there from the floating alone in the sky at the end of Season 4 moment, the show has at least 2 seasons of trust erosion, identity fracture, and political collapse to navigate. The April 22nd finale was the show telling you in advance that the path will not be heroic. The path will be exactly what Mark just promised Thrag. The thing that has been hard for some viewers to accept is that this show, which began as a deconstruction of the Superman archetype and which has spent 4 seasons systematically dismantling the idea that strength alone makes a hero, is now asking you to watch its protagonist become something he spent 3 seasons fighting his father over. It is asking you to watch a young man choose the wrong thing for the right reason and live with the consequences in real time. It is asking you to sit with the possibility that the show's ending will not redeem him. There are versions of this ending. There is the version in which Mark years from now tells Eve what he did, and she helps him carry it. There is the version in which Cecil finds out and the response is military. There is the version in which Alan discovers and the conflict becomes the spine of the final 2 seasons. There is the version in which one of the 37 hidden Viltrumites breaks the deal and exposes the whole arrangement. There is the version in which Mark himself, decades from now, makes the decision that his father made, and tries to free the species by force. The show is not telling you which of these versions is coming. The show is telling you that it knows, that the path forward is mapped, that the writers are several seasons ahead of the audience, and that the slow patience with which they have built to this finale is the same slow patience with which they will land the resolution, whenever and wherever it comes. There is one more thing the finale does, and it is the kind of choice that becomes more impressive the longer you sit with it. The episode title, "Don't Leave Me Hanging Here," is a line of dialogue that occurs twice. Once near the beginning, when Tech Jacket, the teenage heroine voiced by Zoe Deutsch, says it to Mark on the ship home, trying to draw him into a conversation he is too preoccupied to participate in. He does not respond. He stares out the window, the line floats in the cabin and lands on nothing. The second time the line occurs is at the very end of the episode, after Thrag has departed, after Mark has agreed, after he is floating alone in the sky. He says it himself. He says it to no one. He says it the way someone might pray, if they had stopped believing in anyone who could hear. Don't leave me hanging here. The camera holds on him. The sky is empty. The episode ends. That repetition of the title across the episode is one of the show's most disciplined uses of formal craft. The first time Tech Jacket says the line, she means it the way teenagers always mean such things, as a casual prompt to keep a conversation going. She is asking Mark to engage with her, to throw back a quip, to play the social game 2 young people on a long flight should play to keep the boredom at bay. Mark, who has just spent the back half of the season being disemboweled and watching his species nearly exterminated, has nothing to give her. The line falls. The second time, in the sky, when Mark says it himself, the same 5 words carry a different weight. They are not casual, they are not a prompt. They are, in the most literal sense, a prayer. A prayer to no one in particular. A prayer for someone, somewhere, to be hanging on to the other end of whatever rope he is still trying to climb. The show, by repeating the line, has done what the best writing always does. It has taken a small, casual moment from earlier in the story and weighted it with everything that has happened in between, so that the second time the line is spoken, it feels like the entire episode has been preparing you to hear it correctly. The first instance is the setup. The second instance is the payoff. The space between them is the season. This kind of structural callback is something the show has done at various scales across all 4 of its seasons, but the finale's deployment of it is the most disciplined. Earlier seasons used callbacks heavier, with more obvious signaling, with characters sometimes directly remarking on the parallel. The 4th finale does it quietly. It does not point at the parallel. It trusts you to feel it. That trust is what makes the finale, for many viewers, hit harder on second viewing than on first. The first time through, the line is just a line. The second time through, you know it is coming and the line in the cabin lands differently, because you know the line will be said again, alone, in the upper atmosphere, by a man who has just lost the only person he could have asked the question of in good faith. That line is the show's quiet acknowledgement of what Mark has just become. He has joined his father. He has crossed the line he spent 3 seasons refusing to cross. He has lied to the people who love him in order to keep him safe. And there is, in the universe he now occupies, no one left to hear him ask for help. Cecil cannot help him without endangering the deal. Eve cannot help him without learning a truth that would destroy her. Nolan cannot help him because Nolan is the very pattern Mark has just repeated. Alan cannot help him because Alan is on the other side of an information asymmetry Mark himself created. He is alone with what he has done, and the show, with that final line, has named the loneliness out loud. This is what the season 4 finale is. It is not anticlimactic. It is anti-resolution. It is a deliberate, sustained, structurally elegant refusal to give you the satisfaction of a clean ending, because the story the show is telling does not have one. The Viltrumite War, the spine of the season, ended in episode 7 when Mark killed Conquest in a corridor on the Viltrumite homeworld and the Empire collapsed. That was the climax. The 8th episode was never going to top it, and the show knew that. Instead, the show used the finale to do the work that the climax could not, the work of consequence, the work of aftermath, the work of telling you in slow and unhurried beats what victory actually costs. Many of the louder critiques of this finale have come from people who watched it expecting another battle. There are entire podcasts whose hosts spent 2 hours after the episode aired complaining that the show had broken its formula. They were right. The show had broken its formula. Every previous season finale of Invincible has ended on a fight that pushed Mark to a limit. Season 1. The Subway, the orgy of violence between Mark and Nolan that ended with Nolan flying away because he could not bring himself to kill his son. Season 2. The multiversal collapse with Angstrom Levy, the version of Mark who turned into a tyrant in another dimension, and what that revelation meant. Season 3. The corridor fight with Conquest, the moment Mark realized he could win a fight against an older, stronger Viltrumite, only by being willing to take the same damage Conquest was willing to inflict. Each finale built around a fight, each fight a referendum on what kind of hero Mark was choosing to become. The fourth finale, by refusing the fight, has refused the referendum. The question is no longer what kind of hero Mark is becoming, the question is whether he is one. The finale answers that question, and the answer is no. He is not a hero. Not anymore. He is something the show does not have a word for yet, something his father became long before the series began and never fully recovered from, something the show will probably spend the next 2 seasons trying to find a word for. The critical reception of the finale in the weeks since it aired has been instructive. On Rotten Tomatoes, the season as a whole was rated by critics at 100% fresh, with audience scores in the high 80s. The finale itself, considered in isolation, has been the most divisive episode of the season among critics, with reviews ranging from describing it as the show's most mature, or to describing it as a frustrating retreat. The disagreement is itself interesting. Critics who have been with the show since the first season tend to read the finale as the show finally committing to the moral territory it has been gesturing at for 4 years. Critics who came to the show more recently or who were drawn to it primarily for the action sequences tend to read the finale as a structural mistake. Tom's Guide gave the season premiere 3.5 stars out of 5 and praised the season's overall direction. Tech Radar's Ending Explained piece by Tom Power called the finale emotionally devastating and identified the abortion conversation as the season's defining scene. The Review Geek's coverage was more critical, pointing out that the Paul-Debbie breakup being handled off-screen was a structural waste, and noting that the writing room's interest in Mark and Eve sometimes came at the expense of supporting characters who deserved more space. Fandom Wire's Alan Polja, in his review, focused on the bookend structure between the Sequid choice in the premiere and the Thrag deal in the finale, calling it the season's most ambitious structural choice and predicting that it would define how the show is read in retrospect. TV Tropes contributors, working in their distinctive aggregate fashion, cataloged the episode as a deliberate formula-breaking episode and noted the bookend structure as the show's most pointed use of the device in its run. The audience response has been more fragmented. The subreddit dedicated to the show, in the days after the finale aired, was split between viewers calling the deal with Thrag one of the most powerful moments in the show's history, and viewers complaining that the finale lacked the catharsis they expected. The top voted post in the immediate aftermath was a long analysis of the Jan Morgan metacasting payoff in episode 7, which suggests that the audience for the show is the kind that engages with this level of detail. The second most voted post was a furious complaint about Eve's storyline, which suggests that the audience is also the kind that argues about how the writing room handles its central relationships. Both responses are valid. Both responses are evidence that the show has cultivated an audience that pays attention. There has been particular discussion among comic readers about the Thrag deal as an adaptation of the comic's Viltrumite settlement. The comic reader discourse has been split between those who feel the show has improved on the comic by making the deal personal and secret, and those who feel the show has cheapened the comic by removing the diplomatic complexity of the comic's resolution. The disagreement is the kind of disagreement that adaptations always produce. Reasonable people can hold either position. The show has, by making its specific choices, accepted that it cannot please both audiences, and has instead chosen to be its own work, with its own choices and with the corresponding risks. The early review embargo for Season 5, which lifted briefly when the casting announcements were made, contained almost no plot information but did confirm that the writing room had been working on Season 5 before Season 4 had even finished airing, and that Lee Pace's contract for Thrag covers multiple seasons. The implication is that the deal Mark made with Thrag is going to be a sustained presence in the show. Thrag is not the kind of antagonist who will be killed off in the Season 5 premiere. The deal will hold. The pressure on the deal will build. And by the time the deal breaks, which it almost certainly will at some point in the show's remaining run, the dramatic weight of its breaking will be enormous. To understand how unusual that choice is, you have to look at how other comic book adapted television has handled similar moments. The Boys, on the same streaming service, has been working in similar moral territory for 5 seasons. and its season finales have consistently leaned into shock and spectacle to deliver their reset moments. The Walking Dead, also a Kirkman property, ran for 11 seasons and ended with a kind of bittersweet truce that none of its previous finales had prepared you for, and most fans, looking back, agree it was not earned. Daredevil, in its various incarnations, has rarely allowed its protagonist to make a moral compromise of this scale without immediately punishing him for it. The Invincible finale, by contrast, lets Mark make the compromise, lets the compromise stand, and then ends. The punishment, if there is one, will be Season 5's problem. This is a kind of confidence that television rarely shows. The confidence to leave a wound open. The confidence to trust the audience to sit with discomfort. The confidence to refuse the catharsis that the previous 3 seasons have trained the audience to expect. It is, in a real sense, the same confidence the comic showed in its mid-run. There is a long stretch of the comic, roughly issues 60 through 100, where Robert Kirkman wrote Mark through some of the most morally difficult material in mainstream superhero comics, including events the show has not yet adapted and may never adapt directly. The comic in those issues was unflinching. The show in this finale is announcing that it intends to be the same. Whether this is the right choice is something the audience will not be able to evaluate for several years. The finale is laying foundations. Foundations only show their worth when the building is up. What can be evaluated now is the craft. And on craft, the finale is exceptional. The animation produced this season again by the Maven Image platform with significant new work from the studio Wonderstorm Animation is some of the show's most subtle. The hallucinations are animated in a slightly different visual register than the surrounding reality, with a faint chromatic distortion at their edges that the show never points out and that most viewers will not consciously register, but that the eye picks up unconsciously, telling you a fraction of a second before the dialogue tells you that what you are watching is not real. The therapy waiting room is animated with the kind of harsh fluorescent precision that the show has used before for government buildings. The lighting cold and slightly green, the chairs uncomfortable. The magazines on the side table titled with names just close enough to real magazines to be funny, but not so close as to be distracting. The kitchen of Eve's apartment, where the abortion conversation happens, is animated warm, with light coming through the window at a low afternoon angle, the way it would in Chicago in late autumn, the season the show has confirmed it is now in. The voice work across the entire cast is at a level the show has been operating at for a while now, but that bears mentioning every time it happens. Steven Yeun, as Mark, gives a performance in the Thrag confrontation that ranks among the best of his career. And his career includes Burning, which is a film about a man slowly losing his moral footing in slightly the same way Mark is in this finale. Lee Pace, in his first major appearance as Thrag, has been described in early reviews as terrifyingly underplayed. He does not roar. He explains with the patience of a man for whom violence is a tool and not a temperament, and that patience is what makes him the most frightening antagonist the show has produced. Gillian Jacobs' performance in the abortion conversation will be discussed for years. J.K. Simmons, in his quieter scenes with Cecil and Debbie, manages to do something almost no other actor in this medium has been asked to do, which is to make a character who committed mass murder feel, in his older and grayer present, like a person who can still occasionally be looked at without flinching. Walton Goggins, as Cecil, delivers his therapy referral scene with the kind of weary gentleness that has become his signature in the role. Sandra Oh deserves her own paragraph. Debbie Grayson in this finale does what no other character in the show has done, which is move forward without performing it. She gets on a ship, she goes to Tailskaya, she sits with her dying ex-husband and her injured younger son in a room on another planet. She does not give a monologue about how she has come to terms with anything, because the show is honest enough to know that human beings do not come to terms with what Debbie has lost in this series. They simply continue. And Sandra Oh, with her voice work and the animation team's work on her face, makes that continuation a performance of its own. There is a moment in her last scene with Nolan on the ship to Tailskaya, where she looks at him across the small cabin and the camera holds on her face for a second too long, and what passes across her features is not love, and not hate, and not forgiveness, and not anger. It is recognition. The recognition of a person who knows that the man across from her is the wreckage of someone she once loved, and that the wreckage is still here, and that she will be civil to it for the sake of their children, and that there is nothing else left to give. It is one of the most adult performances on television in 2026, and it happens in 2 seconds, with no dialogue, and almost no one will mention it in any of the recaps. The music, scored by John Paisano, has been steadily restrained this season, a deliberate counterweight to the chaos of the action sequences. In the finale, the score is almost absent. Long stretches of dialogue play with no music at all. the room tone doing the work. When music does enter, it enters small. A single piano line under the Eve conversation. A held string under Cecil and Nolan. A solo cello, almost inaudible, under the final shot of Mark alone in the sky. The restraint is deliberate. The show is asking you to listen to the room, not to be cued by the score. The decision pays off. There are smaller details that bear mentioning, because the finale is dense with them and they reward second and third viewings. The Cecil-Nolan conversation includes a small visual gag in which Cecil, sitting at his desk, has a coffee cup with the Pentagon logo on it. The cup is the same cup he had in the first season's pilot. When he first met Mark, the animation team has been seeding small visual continuities like this since season 2, and the cup has appeared in every Cecil scene set in his office. It is a Pentagon-issue ceramic mug from the 1980s, and the show has used it as a quiet signal that, regardless of how much the world has changed around him, Cecil is the same man in the same chair making the same compromises. The cup is on the desk during the Nolan conversation. It is also on the desk during the Mark conversation. Cecil does not pick it up in either scene. The animation team is telling you, through the prop, that Cecil himself has not moved. The Eve apartment has a single photograph on the refrigerator. It is a photograph of Mark and Eve and a small group of friends taken at what looks like Mark's college graduation before everything that has happened in the last 2 seasons happened. Mark's hair is different. Eve's clothes are different. The friends in the photograph are mostly dead or estranged from one or both of them. The photograph has been in every Eve apartment scene this season, and most viewers will not have noticed it. The show is asking you, if you look closely, to register how much of the life this couple was building together has already been lost. The conversation about the abortion happens with that photograph in the background of every shot. The Coalition Central Command Station, where Alan receives the Tatus video will, is animated with the same architectural language the show has used for Tailskria in the earlier seasons. Rounded surfaces, soft lighting, floors that appear to absorb sound rather than reflect it. The implication, never stated, is that the Coalition Station was designed by Tailskrian engineers, and that the political alliance the Coalition represents has its center of gravity in a culture the show has, across 4 seasons, consistently animated as the most thoughtful and the most contemplative in the galaxy. Alan, who is Unopan and who comes from a much more warlike culture, sits in this contemplative space looking distinctly out of place. The show is telling you, through the architecture, that he is in a job designed for someone else. The starship Mark and Nolan returned to Earth on is the same class of vessel that Alan flew in the first season. When he first appeared, his face battered, his ribs broken, on Mark's parents' front lawn. The continuity is small but deliberate. The ships the show uses for friendly aliens are all the same design family. The ships used by Viltrumites are a different design family. The ships used by Coalition forces blend both. By the time the finale arrives, you have been seeing variations of these designs for 4 seasons, and the show trusts that you will register, on some level, that the ship carrying Mark home is part of an alliance, not part of a conquest. The point is small. It matters. The Sinclair laboratory, where the portal disaster happens, includes a small detail that several careful viewers have flagged. There is a notebook on Sinclair's desk that in one shot is briefly visible. The notebook is open to a page covered in equations and what appears to be a sketch. The sketch is of a humanoid figure in a kind of containment harness. The figure resembles very closely the body of Robot's original organic form, the misshapen and dying body in the chair beneath the floor in earlier seasons. The implication is that Sinclair, in addition to the portal work, has been developing something connected to robots specifically. The show has not yet told you what. The notebook is on screen for less than 2 seconds. It is the kind of detail the show plans for the audience that watches twice. The therapy room where Cecil takes Mark is animated with what looks like, in the background, a window overlooking the National Mall. The angle and the light suggest that the room is high up in a building somewhere in central Washington. The Pentagon, which is across the river in Virginia, is not visible. The therapy is happening, in other words, in a building separate from the Global Defense Agency's main headquarters. The implication is that the agency has internal therapy resources, but routes its operatives to external providers for serious cases, the way real intelligence agencies do, in order to maintain a degree of independence in the diagnostic process. It is the kind of small world-building choice that the show makes constantly. The cumulative effect is to ground the wildest superhero events in a world that feels procedurally and institutionally real. The animation of the Thrag meeting in the sky uses a technique the show has only used twice before. The background, normally rendered with parallax depth, becomes almost flat during Thrag's monologue. The clouds stop moving. The faint Earth curve below becomes a still backdrop. The effect is to make the scene feel like a stage, like a moment that is happening outside of time, like an event that is more theological than meteorological. The other 2 times the show has used this technique were the scene in Season 1 where Nolan beat Mark unconscious on the subway platform, and the scene in Season 3 where Conquest first appeared on Earth. Both of those scenes were moments when the show was telling you through the visual register that what was happening was a structural pivot, that the rules of the world were being changed in front of you. The Thrag meeting is the 3rd such scene. The show is telling you, in animation language, that the conversation Mark just had is on the same level of structural significance as those previous 2 scenes. It is the kind of choice you can only make if you trust your audience to feel the language without having it explained. There is so much in this episode that none of it can be fully unpacked in a single discussion, and a great deal of it will only become legible in retrospect, after Season 5 reveals which of these planted seeds were the most important. The Hell material may pay off enormously. It may also turn out to be a structural digression the show eventually walks away from. The Allen Scourge virus material is almost certainly the spine of Season 5, but how exactly the show plays it is impossible to predict. The Eve-Mark relationship, which the finale leaves intact but altered, will have to find a way to either hold or break under the weight of what Mark is now hiding. Cecil's referral of Mark to therapy is the first time in the show's run that any superhero has been asked, by their employing agency, to seek genuine mental health support. And the implications of that choice for how the agency works in Season 5 are significant. The Donald subplot is a slow burn that may not pay off for 2 more seasons, but when it does, the payoff will likely involve Robot and Monster Girl in ways the comic readers can guess at, but the show has not yet confirmed. The Damien Darkblood material, if it goes the direction the mid-credits scene implies, may bring the show into territory it has never visited, and may not be entirely suited to. The 750 hidden Viltrumites, whose number the show has very carefully not yet confirmed beyond Thrag's stated 37, will be a presence in every subsequent season, whether they are on screen or not. The fact that the show is willing to plant this many seeds, with this much patience, with this little immediate payoff, is the strongest argument for why the finale is not anticlimactic, but anti-rushed. The writers are working at the pace of the long form. They are trusting that the audience will return. They are betting on the cumulative effect of a show that, by its end, will have spent 6 or 7 seasons earning every reveal. Whether that bet pays off is the question of the next several years. For now, what you have is a finale that broke its show's formula on purpose, that delivered the climactic emotional beat through dialogue rather than violence, that handed its protagonist his father's hardest lesson and watched him accept it, and that ended on a single line spoken to an empty sky. Don't leave me hanging here. Mark says it, no one hears it, the camera holds, the credits roll. There is something worth saying about the closing seconds of the credits themselves, because the show has, since the first season, used its end credits sequence as a sustained piece of structural meaning. The credits, in Season 1, were a clean white-on-black scroll over a neutral score. After the first season's finale, in which Nolan beat Mark bloody on the subway platform, the credits sequence began to be slowly stained with a single red splash that grew larger and more textured with each subsequent finale. By the Season 3 credits, the splash covered roughly half the screen and bled at the edges. The Season 4 finale credits on April 22nd, 2026 contained a new visual element. The red is still there. It has not grown, but for the first time in the show's history, there is also blue, a faint, almost imperceptible blue tint washing across the top of the frame, the color of the upper atmosphere at high altitude, the color of the sky in the final shot of Mark floating alone after Thrag is gone. The blue is small. It is easy to miss, but it is there, and it represents in the most literal way the credits sequence can, a new color in the visual language of the show. The red of violence has been joined by the blue of distance. The hero, the credits are telling you, has now moved into a register where the cost is no longer measured in spilled blood. It is measured in altitude, in separation, in the empty space between him and everyone he loves. That is the show announcing, with the smallest possible gesture, what Season 5 will be about. Mark and Eve will probably get married before the next season is over. The comic, in its later issues, married Mark and Eve in issue 132, and the show has been building toward that beat since at least the second season. The wedding will happen against the backdrop of Mark's secret. It will happen with Eve knowing nothing about the 37 Viltrumites hidden in the human population. Mark will say his vows knowing that the woman he is marrying does not know who he has become. That gap is the Season 5 engine. That gap, more than any villain, is the antagonist the next season will explore. The Hell material will probably return early in Season 5, with Damien Darkblood seeking out Mark or Cecil to report that something has changed on the demon side of the cosmos. Volcanica, whose presence in the season was strange and unresolved, is almost certainly being saved as a recurring antagonist. The political dynamics of Hell, which the show has only sketched, will likely be filled in across the next season. Whether they will integrate with the Viltrumite material or run parallel to it is unclear. The Alan subplot will almost certainly drive the second half of the season. The video will from Thetis has set up an information asymmetry that cannot remain stable for long. Alan will either tell Mark about the perfected Scourge virus and force Mark into a corner, or Alan will keep it secret and become, like Mark, a man with a deadly thing in his hands and no one to share it with. Both of those paths are interesting. The show will probably take the second. Cecil and Nolan's relationship, which the finale recalibrated with such precision, is unlikely to recur in any major way next season. Simply because Nolan will be off-planet, but the moral architecture of that scene, the question of whether apology is enough when forgiveness is impossible, will continue to ripple through how the other characters handle Mark's growing distance from them. Debbie's arc on Tailskria, with the injured Oliver, is harder to predict. The comic took Oliver in directions the show has so far refused to follow, including a great deal of darkness about Oliver's psychological development as a half-Viltrumite, half-Thraxan child growing up faster than human time would allow. Whether the show goes there with Oliver is one of the open questions of Season 5. If they do, the family material will become the show's quiet center of gravity in a way it has not been since Season 2. Donald and the Sinclair material will be slow. Robot and Monster Girl, trapped in whatever dimension they are trapped in, will eventually come home. But the show is in no hurry. The notebook with the robot-shaped sketch is the kind of seed that may take a full season to bloom. And Mark, the Mark who exists at the end of this finale, the Mark who has just lied to save the planet, and now has nowhere to put that lie, will continue. He will continue going to therapy. He will continue smiling at Eve. He will continue on patrols, on missions, on the small daily heroism of being a superhero on Earth, knowing the whole time that the species his father once led is alive in human bodies, and that he is the only one in the world who knows it. The weight of that secret will, over time, do to him what it did to his father. The show is not hiding this. The show is telling you, in the final shot of the finale, in the empty sky, in the line spoken to no one, that the path Mark is on is the path Nolan walked. The only question is how long it takes him to arrive at the same place. There is a thing the show has been quietly doing across its entire run, and the finale is the most direct expression of it. The thing is this: the show is not a story about a hero. The show is a story about a family. The Graysons, Nolan and Debbie and Mark and Oliver. Each of them is in their own way carrying the weight of what Nolan did in Season 1. Debbie carries it as a betrayal of trust. Oliver carries it as inheritance. Mark carries it as something he has tried, across 4 seasons, to refuse, and that has now, in this finale, finally caught him. The family is the unit. The hero is a beat in the family's longer story. The Walking Dead, Kirkman's other major work, told a similar kind of story for 11 seasons. The thing that made The Walking Dead at its best work was its insistence that the apocalypse was not about the zombies. The apocalypse was about what people did to each other when the structures that normally held them in check fell away. Invincible, in its best moments, has been doing the same thing in a different key. The superpowers are the structures falling away. The question is not what humans do with their powers. The question is what families do when one member has powers the others cannot imagine. When Mark made his deal with Thrag, he did not just betray Earth's collective trust. He betrayed his family. He took the thing that has been the show's spine, the slow generational repair of the damage Nolan did, and he undid it. He became, in that moment, his father. Not by violence, by secret, by choosing to know something his family cannot be allowed to know. Nolan did this for decades, hiding what he was from Debbie, hiding what he was from Mark, telling himself that the lie was protection. Mark, in the sky, in 3 minutes of conversation with Thrag, did the same thing. The show is asking you, in the silence that follows, to see the rhyme. Some of you, watching that scene tired and sleepy on a Wednesday morning, registered the rhyme consciously. Others of you registered it without knowing you had. That is what the show is counting on. That is the kind of audience this show has cultivated. The viewers who notice the cup on Cecil's desk. The viewers who clock the photograph on Eve's refrigerator. The viewers who feel, without being told, that the blue tint in the credits is new. This show is for people who watch carefully. The finale, which rewards careful watching to an almost cruel degree, is built for them. It is also built for the people who watch it to fall asleep. The pacing of this episode, slower than any previous Invincible finale, is hospitable in a way the show has not always been. The Eve conversation, with its still camera and its long pauses, is the kind of scene the brain can rest inside. The Cecil-Nolan exchange, restrained and adult, gives the listening mind room to settle. Even the Thrag confrontation, for all its stakes, is staged in such a still, contemplative way that the body, watching, does not get jolted out of repose. The show is accidentally, or perhaps not accidentally, made one of its most sleep-friendly episodes by making one of its most internal. If you watched it for the first time and missed something, the things to go back for are the cup, the photograph, the blue in the credits, the chromatic edge on the hallucinations, the architectural language of the coalition station. The moment Sandra Oh's face does the work of an entire monologue without saying anything, and the line at the end, spoken to no one, that the camera holds on longer than it needs to. Those details are the show. Those details are why the finale, on a structural level, is the most ambitious work this team has produced. If you watched it and were confused by the deal with Thrag, the simplest framing is this. Mark could have killed Thrag in that fight. Mark, after his recovery from the Conquest disembowelment in episode 7, is at the strongest he has ever been. He has the physical capacity to end Thrag, even alone. What he does not have is the moral capacity to take responsibility for what would happen next. If Mark kills Thrag, the other 36 Viltrumites either die of the loss of their leader, in which case Mark is the man who finally exterminated his species, or they retaliate, in which case Earth burns, and Mark is the man who lost the planet by being prideful in a moment that called for caution. Mark, in choosing the deal, is choosing not to be the man who decided. He is choosing to live with the consequences of a survival that is shared with people he hates, rather than a victory that he alone owns. That choice, the choice not to win, is the choice his father never made. Nolan in Chicago decided. Nolan killed the Guardians of the Globe. Nolan was the man who took responsibility for the world's worst outcomes. Mark in the sky refused to be that. The show is telling you, with this beat, that Mark has learned something his father never did. Whether that learning will turn out to be wisdom or cowardice is the question the next 2 seasons will answer. If you watched it and were unsatisfied by the lack of a fight, the comfort the show is offering is structural. The fight was last episode. The 7th episode, Don't Do Anything Rash, contained the climactic battle of the season, with Mark, Nolan, Conquest, and a contingent of remaining Viltrumites tearing each other apart on the Viltrumite homeworld. Conquest, voiced by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, was the centerpiece. He disemboweled Mark in a long, gruesome scene that has been called in early reviews the most violent thing the show has ever animated. Mark killed him in return. The metacasting here is one of the show's most pointed jokes. Jeffrey Dean Morgan in The Walking Dead played Negan, the man who killed Glenn, the character voiced by Stephen Yeun. In Invincible's 7th episode of Season 4, Yeun's character killed Morgan's character in a corridor with his bare hands after Morgan's character had nearly killed Yeun's character first. The inversion is deliberate. Robert Kirkman, who wrote both shows, has structured this beat so that the comic book death of Glenn, which has haunted Yeun's career and which fans of both properties have never fully gotten over, is, in some small symbolic way, balanced. The Walking Dead took Glenn from Yeun. Invincible, with Conquest's death, gives him something back. It is worth pausing on that beat because the metacasting is one of the most quietly significant choices Kirkman has made in his career. The death of Glenn in The Walking Dead in the 7th season premiere that aired on October 23, 2016 was a piece of television that broke its audience in ways that the showrunners did not fully anticipate. Stephen Yeun had been on the show since the first episode in 2010. Glenn was, for many viewers, the moral center of the show. The casting of Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Negan and the decision to film Glenn's death the way it was filmed, with his eye partially out of his head and his last words spoken to a pregnant Maggie, was the kind of choice that made some viewers stop watching the show and never return. Yeun himself has spoken in interviews about the difficulty of that experience, about the way it shaped his career, about the way he had to consciously work to not let that role and that ending define what he could do as an actor. He went on to do Burning, Minari, Nope. He became, in the years after The Walking Dead, one of the most interesting actors of his generation. And during all of that, he was also building Mark Grayson, on the show owned by the same company that owned The Walking Dead, written by the same man who wrote Glenn's death. And he was, in a sense, working in the shadow of that earlier ending. When Robert Kirkman cast Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Conquest 2 seasons ago, viewers who knew the metacasting saw it immediately. The intent could not have been clearer. Kirkman was setting up an inversion. Whether the inversion would come in Season 3 or Season 4 was unclear, but it was coming. Season 3 ended with Mark and Conquest's first fight unresolved. Mark grievously injured but alive. Conquest retreating to fight another day. Season 4, Episode 5 gave you the rematch with Mark surviving but not winning. Season 4, Episode 7 gave you the resolution. Mark in a corridor on the Viltrumite homeworld, with his body open from a wound Conquest had just inflicted, killed Conquest with his hands. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's voice work in his death scene is one of his best performances. He plays Conquest's last moments with a kind of grim acceptance, the recognition that a 5,000-year-old Viltrumite warrior is being killed by a 23-year-old hybrid kid from Earth, and the recognition that, in some cosmic balance, this is fair. The young Morgan inversion is not the only piece of meta casting in this season. The casting of Peter Cullen as Thetis is its own loaded choice. Cullen is, for a specific generation of viewers, the voice of authority itself, the voice that, in the 1980s and across every Transformers iteration since, has played Optimus Prime, the most morally serious cartoon character in the history of the medium. By casting Cullen as Thetis, the founder of the Coalition, the rebel Viltrumite who turned against his species to protect the galaxy, Kirkman is calling on every viewer who grew up with that voice to map their feelings about Optimus Prime onto Thetis. The mapping works. Thetis, across his appearances in the season, carries a moral weight that the show does not have to earn through dialogue, because the voice itself carries it. When Thetis dies, in an off-screen event that the show conveys through reaction shots of other characters, the loss feels, to viewers who have heard Cullen's voice their whole lives, like the loss of something fundamental. The show is using metacasting to produce emotional effects that would otherwise require many more hours of screen time to earn. The casting of Indira Varma as Volcanica, the leader of the Vile, is the third major metacasting choice of the season. Varma, known to most viewers as Alaria Sand in Game of Thrones, brings to Volcanica the same combination of seductive control and barely contained violence that defined her work in that earlier show. Her scenes as Volcanica are brief in this season, but every one of them has been singled out as memorable. The character is set up as a long-term threat. The casting tells you, before any dialogue confirms it, that Volcanica is the kind of antagonist whose harm is going to be patient and personal. Eric Bauza, who voices D.A. Sinclair, brings the kind of slimy charisma to the role that Sinclair had in the comics, where he was one of the more memorable mid-tier antagonists. Zoe Deutch's tech jacket, in her first season, in a significant role, is built as Mark's structural mirror, a teenager too young to be doing what she is doing, a person whose family relationships are central to her arc, a hero who has not yet been corrupted by the moral compromises Mark has begun to make. The contrast is deliberate. When Tech Jacket appears on screen with Mark in the back half of the season, she is functionally what Mark was 4 seasons ago, and the show, by putting them in the same frame, is asking you to see what Mark has lost. Winston Duke, who voices Space Racer, is another casting choice that pays off through reference. Duke, known for his work in Black Panther and Us, brings a quiet authority to the role of a being whose central trait is patience. Space Racer in the comics is one of the show's most powerful supporting heroes, and Duke's voice work in the season's middle episodes has been a slow build that will pay off when, as the show is signaled, Space Racer becomes a more central figure in Season 5. Michael Dorn, who voices Battle Beast, is the final major metacasting choice. Dorn, known to a generation of viewers as Worf from Star Trek: The Next Generation, brings to Battle Beast the same combination of warrior pride and quiet melancholy that defined Worf. Battle Beast in the comic is one of Kirkman's most beloved supporting characters, and Dorn's voice gives him the exact register the comic established. His appearances in the season, particularly in the climactic battle on the Viltrumite homeworld, have been highlighted as some of the season's most emotionally satisfying moments. The aggregation of these casting choices, taken together, suggests that Kirkman and the show's other producers have been building a kind of meta-textual architecture in which the voices the audience already knows are being used to do work that the show, on the strength of its writing alone, would have taken longer to achieve. The strategy is risky. If the metacasting becomes too obvious, the show can feel like a referendum on the audience's media history, rather than a work in its own right. The show, across its run, has mostly stayed on the right side of that line. The Ewan Morgan inversion in Episode 7 is the clearest payoff of that strategy, and the way the show handled it, by burying the inversion inside an action sequence rather than calling attention to it through dialogue, is the model for how to do this kind of casting work. That fight, the actual climactic battle of the season, was last episode. The 8th episode was the epilogue. The 8th episode was the part where the war ends and the survivors have to figure out how to live with what they did. If you wanted the 8th episode to be another fight, the show is gently telling you that you are watching the wrong show, or at least watching this show on the wrong wavelength. The show, by Season 4, is interested in the slow work. The fights are the easy part. The waking up after, the going home, the walking into the apartment and finding out what your partner went through while you were gone. That is what the show has spent the finale doing, with more patience than almost any other comic book adaptation has been willing to grant. There is something else the finale is doing that some of you may have felt without naming. The episode is, in its quiet way, an argument against the genre it belongs to. The Invincible comic, from its first issue in 2003, was a critique of the Superman fantasy. The premise that the strongest hero on Earth might be a monster wearing a hero's face was a refutation of the assumption that strength is good. Each season of the show has deepened that refutation. By season 4, the show is making the next argument, the one the comic made in its final issues, but which the show is making more carefully. The argument is that even when a hero is good, even when the moral compass is calibrated correctly, the position of being the strongest will corrupt the calibration. There is no version of having Mark's power that does not eventually require him to make Mark's deal. There is no version of having his father's strength that does not eventually require his father's compromises. The show is telling you with the finale's ending that the genre itself, the superhero genre, is a fantasy that breaks under enough weight. And what breaks it is exactly this: the cost. You will see this argument continued in season 5. You will see Mark, the kind young man you have watched for 4 seasons, slowly become less kind. You will see Eve notice. You will see Cecil notice. You will see Alan notice before anyone else because Alan has the perfected scourge virus and the political position to do something about it. You will see the marriage strain under the secret. You will see the friendship strain under the lie. And you will see, somewhere around the middle of the season, Mark begin to do small things that are not exactly betrayals but that no longer feel like the things a hero would do. Manipulations of public information, suppressions of certain reports, removals of certain people from positions where they might ask questions. He will tell himself, every time, that he is protecting Earth. That is the same thing his father told himself. The show will not be subtle about the parallel. This is the show. This is what it has always been, and the season 4 finale, more than any episode before it, is the show admitting out loud that this is what it has always been. The first season was the seed. The 4th season finale is the bloom. The 5th season will be the fruit. Whatever the fruit tastes like, the show has earned the right to grow it. For now, what you have is a young man hovering alone in a sky he has just emptied of meaning. A father preparing to leave a planet that no longer wants him. A mother going to nurse an injured child on a world she has never wanted to visit. A girlfriend processing the kind of grief that has no completion. A spy master making the smallest reach toward kindness he has ever made in his career. A cyborg punching a console because the men who built it ran. An alien staring at a video recording from his dead mentor. A demon detective watching something stir in a kingdom no one else believes exists. And 37 survivors of a species that is supposed to be dead, walking among the human population, indistinguishable from the rest, breathing the air of a planet they have just agreed to inherit slowly. That is what the show ended on. That is what the show wants you to carry into the wake for season 5. That is the work of a finale that knows exactly what kind of story it is telling and is willing to risk your patience to tell it correctly. The show will be back. The voice actors have signed on. The animators are already working. Robert Kirkman has confirmed that he has the next 2 seasons mapped, and that the final season, whenever it arrives, will end on the porch with the White House and the unaging man and the woman who has waited 500 years for him to be still. That ending is years away, but the architecture for it was laid brick by brick in the 8 episodes of season 4, and the keystone of that architecture was set on April 22nd, 2026, in a sky above a country no one in the show ever named, where a young man, alone, asked the empty air not to leave him hanging here, and the empty air did not answer. You came here to fall asleep to this. Maybe you are still awake. Maybe the episode has been replaying itself in your head the way Mark's hallucinations have been replaying themselves in his. Maybe you have been turning the deal over, looking at it from every side, wondering whether you would have done what he did. That is what the show wants you to do. That is what the show has been building toward for 4 seasons. The audience that watched this finale carefully is now a participant in the question the show is asking. There is no objective answer, there is only the answer each of you settles on, in the dark, in the small hours, in the time after a long week, when the question of what it would take to make you become your father is no longer abstract. Sleep when you are ready. Some of this will still be here in the morning, some of it will not. The show will be back and the question will be back with it, and what you decide in the meantime is between you and the dark. What this finale has given you in its quiet and unhurried way is a question that will outlast the season. Whether a young man with the power to refuse his father's logic can avoid becoming his father. Whether a hero who chooses survival over victory has chosen wisdom or surrender. Whether the deal in the sky was the moment Mark saved the planet or the moment he lost himself. The show is not telling you. The show has trusted you instead to sit with the question the way Mark is sitting with it, alone, at altitude, in air that has nothing left to say back. If you found something worth carrying away from this, subscribing helps more than you'd think. Thank you for staying. Sleep well.